welcome to Skill Tree, where we learn how to do just about everything. So, from barbarian to warrior king, from noble lady to commoner, there's one little staple piece of clothing used in most media that really just starts to scream like medieval times. I mean, aside from like a cloak, of course, and armor, and weapons. Or I guess there are a lot of things. But the specific piece we're talking about today is the luscious Fur Mantle. Not terribly unlike the kind that you see right here. Also unlike every episode of Game of Thrones. Doesn't matter what temperature it is, everybody loves rocking the furs, what can I say? So that's what we're going over today. We're gonna try our hand for the first time at sewing fur together and making one of those badass little mantles. Before I do though, I did want to call attention to the little thanks button that YouTube now lets us have. I think it's called a super thanks. It looks like this. Just underneath this video, and it's great if you want to like buy us a coffee or something stronger. It's just a cool new little feature that lets you throw us a couple of bucks if you like what we do here. All right, so with that shameless little plug out of the way, let's jump right to it and level up this skill. Now, this one was specifically a really relaxing one for me to make because, well, I didn't make it. For my business partner, editor, and all-around pain in the ass, Madi was coming up to visit and just happened to find some of these rabbit pelts that I had in my collection. I got them a while back. I think they were like $9 a piece at Tandy Leather, and I'm like, I will totally be able to make something out of these. But I found them so pretty, and I usually end up using them like this as like a textural bit or something in the background of a lot of my thumbnail photos that I just decided to hang on to them as is. But where I just saw fluffy background texture, she was like, I'm gonna make a badass mantle out of these. And you know what? I respect it. I'll let him go for that. So to get started, she positioned them on our little dummy in a way that she thought looked good. And this right here is where we ran across our first issue we had to overcome. Basically, that is the issue of making these two pelts into one badass mantle. In order to do this, of course, we're gonna have to sew them together, but because the skin on these pelts are so thin, and then you also have fur to contend with, it isn't a simple matter of just kind of looping them over each other and sewing them. For starters, depending on how you go about it, those stitches can cause that skin to either like pucker or even just straight up tear through. And then with the fur, if you get the fur caught in those stitches, they're gonna like lay all funny and you're gonna be able to see very clearly where that seam is. And we don't want that to happen. We want this to look seamless. We want it to look like one piece. So to get around this, Madi first started by finding out how she wanted the two pieces to match up. Also, as a side note, make sure the fur is all going in the same direction. If you have the fur kind of laying down one way and then it going the other way, no matter what, it's gonna look wonky. They're not gonna look like they go together. So once she found the spot she wanted them in, she bent it back over itself right where that seam would end up, then clipped them together. Then she did this on the other side as well, making sure there was an equal amount of area to sew and that they lined up cleanly. With that fold locked into place, she used a Sharpie just to make sure she didn't lose where those lines would be. Then went back in and cut along those lines to give her the edges that would be sewn. So the way this is gonna work out is you wanna put those fur sides together so there's a nice clean edge to sew and that there's no fur sticking up in between them. While doing this, Madi came up with a really good way to keep that fur from poking through that edge by just wetting the tips of her finger and using that water to help keep the fur together and laid down flat. And let me just say, while we were researching how to sew pelts together, she didn't see this trick anywhere, so she was quite proud of herself for coming up with this little one. So congrats, Madi. This was clever. It was a good one. Once she had all that fur out of the way, she clipped those edges together exactly where she wanted them. Now to sew these together, we're gonna end up using what's called a whip stitch. The setup for this is really simple. It's a one needle operation on a piece of thread that has a little knot in the end. To hide that knot, we start by piercing the needle between the two pieces of fur and pulling it through until that knot catches. Then she looped it around and pierced through both pieces of fur, pulling it just tight enough to make those two edges kiss, completing that first stitch. After that, she just goes through the rest of the seam, piercing through both pieces of the pelt, and tightening it just enough to keep both pieces together. Then circling back and going back through the same hole before moving over through the next. Doing this provides a really strong hold that won't cause the fur to pucker or lay funny. Now if as you go any of that fur starts to push through that seam, you can just use your needle to push it back down between the two pieces before moving on to the next stitch. To finish this stitch, Madi just sent the needle back between the two furs underneath the last stitch she had created. This forms a little loop. She's then able to send her needle back through that loop and tighten it down to lock it into a knot. With that excess thread clipped away, she went back in with a mallet to hit that seam down nice and flat. Once that's done, she positioned it back on the dummy and made sure all the fur fell in the same way and covered over that seam nice and evenly. And that honestly looks really slick. I love how that whole seam just kind of disappears in the fur and everything falls really nicely on her. It's genuinely starting to look like a badass mantle. With that done though, our next task is to figure out how to keep the damn thing closed. As it stands right now, it's just kind of draping over her, and that looks cool, but the first strong wind that blows or battle pose she has to get into, that thing's gonna fall right off. Luckily, we had a few options ready to go, including this really cool kind of spike and chain closure, as well as this little red buckle I had lying around, and a couple of these button concho type things. If you haven't experienced conchos before, they're just kind of like a button with a screw on back, so you can punch a hole through leather or something, send that concho through, and then screw it into the back so it holds in place. After fiddling around for a little bit, we finally landed on this combination of one of those little button conchos and that spike closure. This way, the button will kind of take up the space on one side and visually add weight to balance out the whole thing and help that spike stay in place. Now again, those rabbit pelts, the skin on them is really thin and it's gonna be easy to tear through. So if we were to just kind of put that concho through and let the spike kind of rest that way, I'm afraid that over time it's gonna stretch and then tear out. So to get around that, we end up cutting out these little discs out of leather that can take on and distribute all of that weight. So basically we'll just take those discs and put them on either side of the leather so that it pulls against the leather and spreads out all that weight across the pelt rather than just having it in one small spot. Now I put Madi to work doing all of this edge stuff, beveling them and slicking them and generally making them look clean. They say many hands make light work, and I could have helped here, but it was way more fun watching her struggle through the process, so I just kind of let it ride. Had a drink, watched her do her thing. Same with dyeing the leather, as a matter of fact. Look at how stupid big my gloves are on her. Again, could have helped, didn't. Found her funnier. It brings my black twisted little heart so much joy. So we also decided that the little metal keeper that went along with that spike was just too bulky and big, so we got rid of it in favor of this little leather strap here. That strap is just going to form the loop for our spike to be able to sit into. So the plan to go off of, Madi went ahead and marked where she needed her holes to go on that leather. Then she punched them in with the hole puncher through all of those bits of leather for one side of the closure. On the other side, she punched where the rivet holes would go, as well as one large hole in the center for our concho button to hold on to. So with all those holes punched and everything ready to go, the next step was to actually attach it onto the mantle itself. So first she placed them where she thought they'd look good, and then used an awl to punch the holes through the mantle where those rivets are going to lock into place. After widening them up a little bit more with the tip of her awl, she positioned those bits of leather on both sides and sent some rivets through. Then she locked them all into place with the recommended striker and anvil. Once those were all set, she used a wide hole punch to make the opening for the concho through the rabbit pelt. With that opening established, she was able to put the concho through and secure it into place with the screw on the back. Knowing that works, she secured the end loop of the chain around that little button and figured out where she wanted the spike closure to land on the other side of the mantle. Then she just did the same thing, punching all her holes and setting those rivets into place. With those locked in, we now have this little strap set up that can hold on to our spike. And again, having these leather discs take up all the pressure of that chain is going to help ensure that it doesn't just rip through the pelt over time. And just like that, this bad boy is done. Look at how dope that came out. Madi's now prepared to either face the White Walkers or spend her first winter away from Florida and face the frozen hellscape up here in the Northeast. There, let me put it on. Seriously though, look at how dope this thing is. This thing came out great. It's really warm, actually. It has been great having Madi come up here and help with this particular project for a couple of reasons. One, having an extra set of hands is just awesome. It gives me a break and it's not something I get very often. But two is the fact that she is starting from straight up zero with a lot of these crafts, not unlike a lot of you are. The whole premise of this show is to point out that you can totally do this stuff. Every episode, I try to tackle a thing that I haven't really tackled before, and if it is something I tackled before, I tackle it in a new way, just to kind of show that process and show how you level up your skill as you go. That being said, if you're just jumping into this now, I'm like 3 years deep, and a lot of time I've been doing a lot of leather crafting because that's what most of you ask for. So by now, I'm, if not good, I'm at least fairly proficient at it. And a lot of the projects I'll be tackling are things that you're gonna look at and be like, ooh, that's a little advanced. If you start at the beginning of my leathercraft project, you'll see I had no friggin' idea what I was doing, and I built up to this. With Madi here, though, it shows you that somebody starting from nil, no leathercraft projects really under her belt at all, is able to make a really cool thing just by kind of looking it up and researching it real quick and then just doing it and trying it. So if nothing else, I hope that this video and this channel in general inspires you to do that. Find a cool thing that you like doing and just do it. Try it. What's the worst that can happen? If it doesn't work out, you've learned a thing and you try it again. Anyways, I hope you liked what you saw here. If you did, why don't you give me some of that like it love, and don't forget to subscribe so you know when I release new content. And I'm sorry, I look good in this thing. In fact, you know what? Leave in the comment section who wore it better. Is it me or is it Madi? Go ahead, leave it in the comment section. I'm interested now. Talk about asking for an ass whooping in the comment section. In the meantime, though, keep leveling up, you. You've made it to the end credits. This is so hot. I'm so hot right now. Thank you for staying this long. The almighty algorithm really kind of takes that into account, and the longer you stay for a video, the kind of better it does. So I really appreciate that support. Speaking of appreciate support, I want to give a shout out to all these incredible people who make this show possible. And a big shout out to my newest high tier level Patreon members, John Ingersoll, Gronberg family, Cameron Clark, Eli Brassard, and John, just John. Thank you for joining those noble ranks. I really appreciate it. If you want to support the show in the same way, why don't you consider joining? Link in the description below. Otherwise, you can go ahead and click on one of these videos here, and that's support too. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm hot, but I'm also real hot, right? Looks good.